All right, I'm going to get started. This talk is Game Achievements Without Steam. So I am Dennis Payne. I'm a game developer and an open source developer. So most of the games that I work on, the source code is available. So I have done games of my own creation, and I've done a lot of updating of other open source games that I've stumbled across. So on the screen here, you can see in the lower right, they have my Zelda clone called Troll Bridge. Above that, you've got Color Monsters and Viobite. Those two games are on the Pocket Arcade or the Tiny Arcade. They have 96 pixels by 64 pixels for their display. So that's why they're so tiny on there. Next to them, you have the BT Builder, which is my open source implementation of the Bard's Tale construction set. In the upper right, you have Ostrich Riders, which is a joust-like game. And below that, you have the one commercial game I programmed, or I was one of the programmers on, and that is Devil's Whiskey. One thing you do not see on this is I do not list that I am a library developer. I'm not really interested in making tools for the development of games. I'm more interested in making my own games. So what I'm presenting here was a bit of a different realm for me to enter. I've given variations of this talk at a few Linux conventions since I started creating this program. At those talks, I give a explanation as to what trophies or achievements are. I'm pretty sure I don't need to do that for this audience. Unless you're exclusively a Nintendo developer, I bet you've probably seen achievements or trophies. As a longtime PlayStation player, I tend to use trophy over achievements. I don't generally like Steam, so I stuck with trophy as the nomenclature I usually use. All right, so why do you want achievements in your game? The first reason that you want to put achievements in your game is that players have come to expect it. If your game is going up on Steam, for example, players generally expect that there's going to be achievements in your game. Those achievements can go over and be extra tasks, which allow the game to live longer than it normally would. So they can go over and complete the game itself and then complete minor objectives that are set out in your achievements. Achievements also allow you to brag to your friends. Maybe you go over and you want to keep one better than one of your friends. So whenever he gets an achievement, you go over and try to get that same achievement or another one. I can't say that's a big draw for me, except perhaps with Minecraft and my son. I try to make sure he doesn't get too far ahead of me on achievements there. Achievements also end up being a virtual game shelf. When I was a kid, I could go over to my friend's house. I could see what games they have for their console systems, And even what games they have for the computer, you could see their discs laid out in the boxes and whatnot. With digital games, digital download being the prominent form of getting games at this point, or a pretty prominent form anyways. Um, it becomes one of those things if it's harder to look at what games your friends have. So achievements can go over and do that. You can go to your friend's profile and see, oh, they've been playing this game, and you might wonder, well, is this a game I might want to play? You can also go over and see that, oh, they started playing this game, but they got none of the achievements. So maybe they didn't think the game was very good. Part of the problem with achievement systems, though, is that it's extra work to add them into your game. And the worst part is it's extra work for each achievement system you incorporate. So if you're releasing your game on the PlayStation, the Xbox, and on Steam, that's 3 different achievement systems that you're going to be working with. And so you may have some third-party libraries or something that'll help with that work, but there will still be extra testing that you will need to do to make sure that the achievements work on each of the consoles and in the computer. Another problem with these systems is that one company is controlling all the data that gets generated. How much of that is a problem depends on your point of view. I'm not sure that there's much that the company can use the data for that could put you at a disadvantage or anything. Maybe they could go over and say, well, we're going to look at all the first-person shooters and see what achievements people actually get in the games, and focus on putting them into our new first-person shooter that we're creating. But I'm not sure that that really gives them a whole lot of additional information. So maybe it's not that important. In the open source community, people tend to be more privacy oriented. So the idea of one person controlling your data doesn't always sit well with people. So they would prefer not to necessarily have that. Now, they might choose to give their data to one big company, but they like the idea of being able to make that choice. So they can go over and say, well, I choose to use Google because it is a nice, convenient option and they work really well. But if it ever becomes a problem, I can switch to a different service if needed. Now, players, they have this disadvantage of they now have their achievements are locked up into multiple systems, assuming they play on more than just one platform. And some players do not like that. And so they have sites like ExoPhase, which go over and collect your achievements from all the different systems and can display them in one site. So it'd be nice if we could have an achievement system that actually works without having to go over and merge the data from multiple competing systems, and that gives control to the players. And so that is where the idea of Gamerzilla came from. It's been something that I've had on my mind for a while. I've mentioned it to other people to try to get someone interested in doing this sort of thing, but no one actually wanted to actually do the work. So after Libra Planet 2020, I decided, you know what? I'm going to sit down and build a achievement system that is not locked away and restricted to a single platform. Gamerzilla is built off of the Hubzilla social networking system. The reason for that is that I don't particularly enjoy web development, and Hubzilla already had a plugin system that would allow me to add in this feature pretty easily. So it's a social networking site, so you have your list of messages that you can see. They also have a separate tab that you can go over and look at your photos. And so my goal was to just add one that would list your achievements in games. And so this is some screenshots from the web interface for it. If you don't believe that achievements work as a virtual game shelf, you might want to ask yourself, are you looking up any of these games right now or writing them down to look up later after the convention is over? I know that when the last BostonFIG talk that I went to, I made sure that whenever someone mentioned a game, I often wrote it down so that I could look it up later. All righty. So how does this work? As I mentioned, Gamerzilla is a plugin to the Hubzilla social networking site. The ideally, as game developers, you will never deal with that end really. What you will be using is libgamerzilla, which is a C library that you can go over and incorporate into your game and will handle sending all of the achievements over to Gamerzilla. Now, the way I envision it working is that you would have a game launcher of some kind that is using libgamerzilla. It synchronizes with your Hubzilla account to get all of your achievements and to upload any new ones that you've gotten. And it'll go over and listen on a network socket to record any new achievements that you get from playing games. Under Linux, it is using a anonymous Unix socket. Windows doesn't exactly have that. From what I understand, they've added Unix sockets recently, but I don't believe it's available under the all versions of Windows, and I don't think it's available under the cross compiler I use under Linux, because I don't like using Windows. So whenever I build a Windows version of a game, I generally try to build it under Linux itself with a cross compiler. So the game will go over and communicate with the game launcher, and the launcher will upload the information to Gamerzilla. You can go over and make the game talk directly to the Hubzilla. The reason I don't recommend that is that then you're going to have to configure the Hubzilla URL and your username and password in every single game that you create. You're going to have that configuration somewhere. And so the game launcher allows you to configure that once and then forget about it. It'll handle that. If you don't have a Hubzilla account, but you have a game launcher that can display the achievements in it, so you want to be able to see your achievements without uploading them online, you can do that. The game launcher will work perfectly fine if there's no Gamerzilla, Hubzilla interface. If you then go over and decide to create one later, it can automatically sync it. If you play on different machines, it can also sync it back and forth. Hubzilla, the Gamerzilla interface on Hubzilla also does have a privacy setting so that you can make it so that no one else can see it except you. In the case of you want to go over and be able to see your achievements and upload them from multiple machines, but you don't want it available to anyone publicly. I've updated a bunch of different games to use Gamerzilla now. Some of these games had achievement systems before Gamerzilla. They would just have achievements that they would record locally. They would have some interface where you can see what achievements you've completed and what you don't have yet. But they didn't have any way to upload that online. Those games that I think have done the achievements really well have typically gone over and collected statistics in one place in the code, and then they award achievements from that location after collecting the statistics. This avoids you littering your code with all sorts of awarding achievements in random locations. So if you've never done achievements before, that would be my recommendation on how to implement it. It may or may not always be possible depending on what sort of unusual achievement you have, but that I find is the cleanest design that I've seen so far. Now, if you want to add Gamerzilla support to your game, what do you need to do? First off, I should mention that I don't like programming in C. But the reason that I chose the C for the library is because almost every single language has support for being able to use C libraries. So it was the lowest common denominator sort of thing. So for a typical game in C, you would go over and call Gamerzilla start at the beginning. The first argument is false, which is whether you are a game launcher or not. And the second argument is where you want to store the results of your achievements locally, so that way if a game launcher isn't running, or you have direct connection to a Gamerzilla site and it's down for whatever reason, you can save all your achievements locally. The example here is set up like what you might do on a Linux system, where they typically have a .local/share, and then your game would have a special directory under there to store your information. Under Windows, you would probably put it under like the users and the username and like app data. So you would need to have some setup there in order to determine where the appropriate location is to place the user files. Then you call Gamerzilla set game from file. That file has all of the achievement information and the image to display for your game. The reason that you need this is because unlike, say, Steam or PlayStation or other stores, there is no central registry where you set up your game and all the achievements. So instead, your game needs to include a file that has all of the achievement information in it that we can then send to the Gamerzilla site. You then have your game loop, and at the end you call Gamerzilla quit. In your game, as I mentioned, I suggest that you have some place where you go over and you collect all your statistics, and then you would call this update trophies function and pass in the statistics. In this case, we're checking to see if you beat level 10, and in which case we set the trophy win game. And if, regardless of whether you won the game or not, we set the trophy stat for the number of enemies killed. Now, you do not see a call to set that you got the trophy slayer, and that is because when you get the maximum progress for that achievement, it automatically awards you the achievement. One thing you might notice is that I did not pass game ID in here. Game ID should really be a global variable if you're just accessing it here. Or either that or it should be passed in. I tried to update the slide to have that, but it then didn't fit easily on the slide. So just ignore that it won't actually compile. But that is in general how you would go about doing it. Now that Gamerzilla set game from file, that is a JSON file. Technically, you don't need to do the set game from file. You can actually go over and create it all in your program itself. But I found that using a file is just the easiest way. The file itself is pretty self-explanatory. You've got a short name, which may or may not be short, depending on how unique you want to make it. You've got a name for your game. You have the image that's going to be displayed for your game, a version number for your trophy file, and the various trophies. Trophies cannot be removed. So if you have a new version where you're adding in more trophies, that's fine. If you want to make a new version and you want to remove a trophy, Gamerzilla does not support that. So you need to be careful about what trophies you add, because once you've added them, you can't remove any of them. One other thing that you might notice is there is no flag for hidden. Most systems have some hidden trophies that you can set up. I generally think hidden trophies are stupid. That is because we have the internet, and it is very easy to go over and find out what the hidden trophies are. PlayStation has even acknowledged that this is a really stupid thing to have. And so when you go over and click on when you select a hidden achievement on the PlayStation trophies user interface, it allows you to unhide that and see what the trophy is. So I don't consider hidden trophies to be a useful addition, so I've done away with them. The one place I see where it is useful is if you have an achievement for some story element where there is some twist that's going on and you don't want the players to know about the twist beforehand. But my recommendation in that case is to just keep the trophy obscure, or accept that people are going to end up learning about the trophy beforehand. And, even if they know about the twist, people have that happen in movies all the time. You know what the ending is going to be, but they enjoy the ride anyways. So I wouldn't recommend worrying too much about that. Again, I've modified the formatting on this a little bit so that it fit easily in the slide. Sorry that it doesn't look so good. Now, most people here probably are not going to be creating a game launcher, but assuming you were, here is what you would need to do to set up a game launcher. You would again call Gamerzilla start. You would set the first parameter to true, and then again you would set up where you want to store the local files, and then you would call Gamerzilla connect to connect to the Hubzilla instance. Gamerzilla is not tied to Hubzilla. It would be very easy to go over and create a different server that could go over and store the information and display it. So in the future, that may be something I look into, because I haven't been entirely pleased with Hubzilla at the moment. And I understand that not everyone's going to be interested in joining this and getting this social network site. But it was a convenient way to kickstart the process. And I actually had hoped that maybe I'd be able to look into doing this before this talk, but life seems to have decided that I shouldn't do that and threw a bunch of roadblocks in my way. After you call these two functions, you need to call Gamerzilla server process periodically. That might be just kick off a thread that calls that all the time and forget about it. There's a callback that you can set up to get the short name and full name for a game. That allows you to go over and say, when you start a game, you can go over and grab the full name and the short name and associate that with whatever game they just launched. With the short name, you can go over and query information about what achievements they've gotten. And so that way you can go over and display that information in the game launcher if you wanted. So the current state of Gamerzilla. Right now, there are a number of games that I have converted to use Gamerzilla. They are all open source games. They have a range of languages that they are using. So you see there's a few games in there that are using C++. There's one game in there using C, another game that's using Python. You have a game that's using NIM, which is a language that I had never heard of until I started working on Gamerzilla. Small Trek was a winner of a Lumdare, I think it was. And I felt that it was a really nice, simple puzzle game. So I went over and added in achievements to it. There are two games that are using the Godot engine and two games that are using the Love engine. The Love engine uses Lua for its scripting. Those two games are actually commercial games you can buy on Steam. They've released the source code. Marvelous Inc. did it right at the beginning. BytePath did it later on. You will see that there are asterisks next to a lot of these saying that they have not been merged by the creator of the project. So I have my own fork of their source code with these changes. Some of them, like Marvelous Inc., are not interested in merging it because I have also updated them to use the latest version of the Love game engine, and they're not interested in going to that. Some of them, like BytePath, they're not interested in merging it because they're not interested in merging anything. They release the source code and that's it. They're not having anything more to do with the code. There is one game launcher on this, Game Hub. It is written in the language Vala. Again, not a language I had heard of until I started working on Gamerzilla. Part of the reason for choosing some of these projects was specifically to show how versatile it is and the fact that you can use it in whatever programming language you feel like using. So that's why I went over and did Python. Was actually the Seahorse Adventures game was actually the first game that I added support to. Even though it would have been easier to add support to like one of the C++ games or a C game. But I chose to make it extra difficult and have an integration with Python right from the beginning. These games are also a variety of different types of games. So Seahorse Adventures, for example, is a platformer. You've got Super Tux Kart, which is a kart racing game. Marvelous Inc. is a Zack-like game where it's a programming game. You've got Witch Blast, which is a twin stick shooter. Hijinks, A Christmas Caper, and Small Trek are both like puzzle games. If you want a game to really show off how good you are at games, I recommend Hijinks, A Christmas Caper, because none of those achievements will you automatically get from going through the game. Instead, there are all things that you have to do beyond just completing the game, which was really annoying when I was trying to test it out and get one of those achievements. So, what's the state of it? What am I working on for the future for Gamerzilla? One of the things I would like to have would be additional game launcher support. So Lutris is another game launcher that's very popular under Linux. itch.io has its own app. that would be nice to add support to. The HIO is HIO app is written in JavaScript, I believe. So I haven't delved into how easy that is to integrate with yet. If anyone has recommendations for open source Windows game launchers, feel free to let me know. I'm much more plugged into the Linux community, so I don't know what is popular under Windows or besides Steam anyways. I mean, obviously that's a popular game launcher, but it's not open source, and I don't really think they're going to be interested in adding in a competing achievement system. Part of my reasoning behind Gamerzilla is that I would like it so that, for example, if itch.io decides that they want to add in achievements to their game store, I would love it for them to be able to say, you know what, there's this Gamerzilla that engine that already does everything for us. We will just go over and write the interface on our website, and then any game that uses the Gamerzilla, the libgamerzilla, will automatically be able to upload your achievements on itch.io. I don't know whether that'll happen, but it's what I envision as a possibility going forward. And then if we get if enough support is available, maybe some of the other smaller players will decide that it's not worth running their own competing achievement system and instead work on a common one that's supported by multiple game stores. Ideally, I'd like to reach out to more game engines to add support. For commercial developers, I'm sure that Unreal and Unity support would be really great. As an open source developer, I'm not really interested in doing that work. If someone is interested in paying for that work to be done, I'm more than happy to help out, but it's not something I'm interested in just doing for fun. Obviously, more games supporting the system increases the likelihood of people using it. Right now, for Linux distribution, it's available in Fedora by default. Ideally, I'd want to have it in Debian as well, which Debian is the base of Ubuntu. So if you get it into Debian, it's pretty much automatically picked up by Ubuntu. I mentioned that Windows and Linux use different sockets for connecting from the game to the game launcher. Because of that, I would like to have a mode for game launchers to turn on a wine mode. So that way, if you're running a Windows game under Linux, it will go over and start listening to the socket that Windows is using. I could go over and set it up so that everyone uses the same setup instead of using anonymous Unix sockets under Linux. I've specifically not done that because I feel that it is more secure to use a Unix domain socket, and whereas a network socket, they've had problems in the past where a web browser has been able to access a local network socket. So I'd rather keep it more secure if I can. Other ideas is a compare achievements functionality. It's available on PlayStation. I assume it's available on other systems as well. Not really a high priority for me, but uh, I do think that it's something worth adding at some point. Right now, Gamerzilla only supports English. Partially that's because of the way Hubzilla is implemented, in that they don't have any way to specify what language you're in. So I need to research how to do what I want to do for that, or perhaps just drop Hubzilla and implement my own server to handle storing the achievements. Another possibility is that right now, when you get an achievement, it is up to the game to decide whether they display that or not. Gamerzilla does not do any display of that. Gamerzilla also does not have any way to see your achievements, any sort of functionality to easily see your achievements. So that sort of thing is a possibility for the future as well. One other thing I should mention, the most achievement systems go over and record when you got an achievement. Gamerzilla does not. That again goes back to this idea that open source developers typically are more privacy oriented. So I decided to not record that information at all, so that no one can use it for anything. It's possible that you could still go over and record when the achievement was uploaded to Hubzilla if you wanted, or if someone was so inclined, but it is not in there by default. I mentioned early in the talk that I am an open source developer and a game developer. I'm not a library developer. I'm also don't really enjoy web development that much. So I have a Gamerzilla web page, and it even looks better than it originally did, because I did put some work into it so that it wasn't as awful as it originally was. It has information on adding support to your game. It also has information for Godot specifically, if you want to add in support under with that game engine. I can be contacted on the free game dev forums. That's a place I frequent. I have been frequent on IRC recently, but with Freenode having issues, I've haven't gone back there yet and decided what I want to do there yet. There's my email address and my Hubzilla channel. From there, you can go over and see what achievements I currently have. Although I will say that I reset them a lot when testing games, so I may actually be further along in the game than my achievements say. Unfortunately, the Hubzilla from the free game dev Hubzilla instance is right now not working for integrating with other social networking sites. So it's not receiving any messages from Mastodon sites, and can't send them to Mastodon sites at the moment. So I may need to find a new host for Hubzilla, for my Hubzilla instance, but that is where I am at the moment. Any questions? But by the way, Michael, I did go to your talk and I debated going over and adding in some games, some open source games that I play. But I can list a lot of them, so I didn't want to dominate your talk there. If anyone wants to know anything more about any of these games that I have converted over, I can talk about that as well. The Open Alchemist is a Tetris Bejeweled type game in that sort of genre. It's a very well polished game. I do recommend it if you enjoy that sort of game. I do not, but my wife does, and so uh, I do think it's a well done game. I do happen to be a big fan of the twin stick shooters, so Witch Blast is high on my list of games to recommend. It's very well polished, and I keep a lot of different versions of Robotron or those type of games, Robotron 2084, that I've had over the past. Pinball Disc Room is a game I made for the Disc Room Game Jam. So it was leading up to the release of the Disc Room game. And so I made a room that was all themed around being in a pinball. Shippy 1984 is a Space Invaders Galaxian type game. The graphics on it are not necessarily the best, but when I was looking for that style of game, I found that the gameplay of it was really good.
Wow, you're here fast.
And so I started updating it. In my case, I needed to have two-player support. So, or two-player simultaneous support is what I was looking for. For my son's Cub Scout pack, we have an arcade machine, and it is loaded up with open source games and only games that support two-player simultaneous play. The games that already have an achievement system but do not have integration with Gamerzilla yet, I've found it's very easy to add. In fact, if anyone knows of open source games that have achievement systems, I would love to know about them. It was one of those things of adding in support for Super Tux Kart, for example, was really easy. The harder part was the fact that the developers didn't want a system that was specific to Gamerzilla. Instead, they wanted a system that could support other achievement systems in the future. And so I had to make my code a little more generalized. But other games like Hijinks and A Christmas Caper and Me and My Shadow, they already had achievement systems, and it was super easy to just add in support. And I guess we'll stop there, unless anyone has any more questions or any questions. if people are working on commercial games as well and need help to add in support for achievements for Gamerzilla, I'd be more than happy to talk with people if they have that interest.